Lego spearheaded a petition to the UN for the need to recognize the importance of play. And they cited that across the world, I think play had decreased by about 25%.
The most noble thing that people can do today is to create systems wherein we reduce the problem of loneliness.
Mm,
And I think that's specifically what games can do, right? Is to allow us to play more and explore connections together
yeah.
more. But then when NFTs came out, then that was the signal for us, wherein there's this new protocol or primitive that would allow you to imagine how games will be built when it's decentralized. And I think it was Jeffrey
Mm,
Hinton.
mm,
I attended a talk that he gave recently on biological intelligence versus digital
mm,
intelligence. And he was saying that his suspicion is biological intelligence works largely the same way as digital
yeah.
intelligence. And just with that small kernel of truth, right, then you can try and understand how human brains work as well, just using these LLMs. I'm of the mind that AI is actually right an actual new kind of intelligence that we've created, and there's no way of turning
Mm,
that back. And so we need to use this technology to imagine a better future. What would it look like when these robots are embodied? What kind of interaction should we have with
mhm.
them? And how could it better play with other humans?
I like to
Mhm.
start these at the beginning and just get a sense of who you are. So if you wouldn't mind sharing where you're from, where you currently are in the world, and then just kind of a brief overview of your professional background.
Sure, yeah. Well, I was originally based out of Manila, Philippines. I lived there for 40 years before moving here
Wow.
in Toronto, Canada. And I guess if you're gonna ask me what I do for a living, right? It's always been a game developer. My first job was a game developer building games for these old phones before the iPhone. Like the first smartphones, I would say.
Mm,
So like the Nokias, these first phones, they just were starting to get onto the internet. And so we saw that as an opportunity to figure out what kind of games could you make with this new form factor and with this new technology. And I guess that's been formed how I've been making games throughout my life. It's always been around the newest technology. So my current company now is OP Games, which is my own startup. We got into kernel mostly because we were exploring Web3. I had a lot of questions around what Web3 really is, how you can use this technology to make better games, I would say. Because as an aside also, as someone who's been making games for quite a while, you can see how technology affects the games that are being made. So I started seeing when I was growing up, the games that I were playing were these games that were on the family computer or the Nintendo Entertainment System. And so it changed quite a bit from the games we see now. And I feel a lot of that has largely been due to platforms and technology. And so that's been the lens that I've had when I try to think of how to build games in Web3. And now, since AI is like the zeitgeist, we've pivoted a little bit towards AI. Still using, I guess, Web3 primitives around how you can build economies, but we're now mindful that AI is changing how games are not just created, but also played. And so we want to explore that space and try to find better games, I would say, and try to help developers build these better games.
mm.
And yeah, I hope that's been a good introduction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. I want to get into your work with OP Games and the intersection of gaming with some newer technologies. You talked about Web3 primitives and the emergence of AI. I know you've been working with agentic AI, but I'd like to
Mm-hmm.
begin a bit before that. And I'm curious, at the beginning of your career, um, why did you get into games development and what were your expectations of it as a career path?
Yeah, well, I guess like most game developers, right? The spark was when you played some of your first games. And in my case, I think the first game I played was on the Atari, which was before the Nintendo Entertainment System. And what really struck me then was, I guess, the agency you have over the screen. Like before then, you would only just watch the TV and you just watch what's happening, but now you can control what's happening on screen. And that excited me a lot. It gave me, I guess, a vision of what can be when you're the hero in front of the screen, right? You're making your own story. And so that's what excited me and made me want to make games. And as with the expectations in the career, game development back then wasn't really as big as it is now, especially back in the Philippines. There were no game development companies then. And so I took I guess, the expected path, which is to go into computer science to learn how to make these games. I didn't really think I would be making them, but I lucked out. I found a company that was exploring them in the Philippines, which is the one that helped me make these games on mobile.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I think I've had a pretty lucky career wherein I knew what I wanted to do early on, and my path led me to that direction.
Cool. And you mentioned that you got into kernel because you were exploring some Web3 primitives. Where were you in your career path at the time that created that curiosity? What were you seeing in Web3 that was going to fill some gaps in the gaming industry?
Yeah, my history in Kernel is actually tied quite a bit with Vivek. Because Vivek, I met him in East Denver, which was, I think, my first East Denver. And that time, I would say Web3 was so new that you had a lot of questions of what this technology really means. Because I remember back then when people were talking about blockchain, right? And people were saying it's just a database, right? And as a technologist, you kind of have that lens, and I wanted to understand more. And that's why I went to East Denver. And then I was able to talk to Vivek. I saw he was creating the first kernel block, Kernel Block 0, I think, wherein he got 100 folks and tried to explore what it really means to build on Web3. So it was Vivek, Andy, right, and all the other early Ethereum folks or early kernel folks who were exploring that space. And so I found it really informed how I looked at Web3 now. I talk about that with other people. A lot of folks, their introduction in Web3 isn't as good as mine, I would say. So their lens is, for example, like meme coins or NFTs, right? But my lens is more around how can we use this technology to reimagine finance, right? To change how money is used and made. And yeah, and so that's kind of been how I found Kernel. I've always been part of the Kernel blocks also. As you might have seen, Makian, we see each other over the Kernel blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that it's really been a good space to center yourself when you have so much noise around Web3,
Yeah.
right? When there's so many people talking about the hype. When you ask, what does this tech really mean? And what is the history of technology and money? Then, yeah, then that gives you a good way to start thinking about the first principles, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Kernel can definitely be a grounding presence when in need. When you first got involved with Kernel, can you talk about your work with the Gaming Guild?
Sure, yeah. We ran it for a few blocks. The first kernel block, I think what we did was we got together folks who were kind of in the gaming space. So I forget his name, but there was someone who was also researching game design in Web3. And there were some people who were also trying to make games there in Block Zero. So we got together and thought of a curriculum that would matter in the context of kernel. And one thing that's unique about the first block also was the curriculum wasn't done yet, right? It was being done by Andy every week. And so every fireside, we would have a few days before where Andy would post out the curriculum and would read it. And then we'll have a fireside about it. And so how we were making the curriculum was we were reading that and then taking what we know with games and trying to make that relevant. So for example, I think the first few kernel readings were on patterns, pattern recognition, right? And that's something that's very, very relevant to games. Like a lot of games, for example, are about recognizing patterns. Games like Candy Crush, right? Wherein you just match three gems together and they
Mm-hmm.
disappear. So there is a lot of connections you can do and a lot of relevance in just looking at the main kernel talk and figuring out how that applies in your own
Mm-hmm.
industry. And so that's how we built the guild. We also tried having our own little firesides, but more towards games. So we would have the fireside for Kernel, and then we would have the gaming fireside, which varied between the blocks. Sometimes I would invite someone who's deep in Web 2 but not very familiar with Web 3, and just get them to talk with the Web 3 folks and get everyone to understand where is the real value here versus all the confusion around what Web 3
Yeah.
is. Yeah, so it's been good. I met a lot of good folks through building the guild, and it also sharpened my thinking a lot because using the curriculum to guide you is centering.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I was reading through the learning module for the Gaming Guild today, and much of
Yeah.
the kernel book, there is reference to David Graeber, and
Yeah.
yeah, I liked the grounding principle of the guild using a David Graeber quote. What's the point if we can't have fun?
No, definitely. Yeah. That article lives rent free in
Yeah,
my head. I always think about it. Yeah. Yeah. It gives you also pause on the relevance or the meaning in what you're doing because David Graeber is not a game
yeah,
developer, right? Like games aren't the thing that he does. I feel like just looking at what he wanted to do with his life, I think that's much more impactful, I would say, in terms of just the frivolity of games, right? And even still, he still feels that games are such an important thing. And so, yeah, that influenced me a lot. There is a lot of meaning still from making games there. People have fun. And there's also a quote there that I think it's Andy who shared from, oh, I'm forgetting the author. Yeah, but it's one of the quotes by, I should go back to
yeah,
the curriculum. But the main thing about the quote is the most noble thing that people can do today is to create systems wherein we reduce the problem of loneliness.
mm,
And I think that's specifically what games can do, right? Is to allow us to play more and explore connections together
yeah.
more.
Yeah, it's true. Obviously David Graeber, as you said, was not a games developer, but kind of through his philosophy of play, there is that can kind of be the substrate from which we can build anything on top of. He expanded on that and on that very simple quote by just posing the question, why does the existence of action carried out for the sheer pleasure of acting, the exertion of powers for the sheer pleasure of exerting them, why does that strike us as mysterious? Play for the sake of play. And, I was thinking that in connection with art as well, because art feels like an extension of that, like a practice of joy. They both feel like practices of joy, in which the intention is purely for the enjoyment of doing them. Obviously, that's not true in the practical world we live in. There are many layers on top of that foundation, but having that in place, I think, is really powerful. I wonder if you could talk a little bit
I
about,
agree.
how OP Games came to be, what your
Hmm.
intention was when you first created it, and where things are now.
Yeah, sure. I would say OP Games was the second iteration of our Web3 startup. The initial idea was, well, I guess we can start with how it started. So before OP Games, I had a games company called Altitude Games. We were making mobile games, and I guess it's mostly focused around how mobile games work, which is a lot around ads, around free to play. How free to play works is you try to get as many people to play the game, and then a small subset of it will pay. And so that's how the system was optimized. And so when we saw blockchain and Bitcoin and these new technologies, we thought it's a new way for developers and players to pay for games initially. And this was before
Mm.
NFTs. Before then, we were just exploring it as a technology because we had an R&D division that thought about that. But then when NFTs came out, then that was the signal for us wherein there's this new protocol or primitive that would allow you to imagine how games will be built when it's decentralized. And during that time also games like CryptoKitties came out, made by also one of the kernel fellows, Benny Zhang from Future
Mhm.
Primitive. And yeah, using that as the base tech, we spun out our company Alto before OP Games. And so we started building tools around NFTs and just reaching out to game developers to teach them how to use this technology and how to build games. And then we created a platform around NFTs. We created our own NFT games. For example, we had a game called Arcadians that allowed you to use your NFTs as characters in the game and have them play based on their stats. I guess that was the direction. We were able to fundraise around Kernel Block 3 or earlier, and that was largely because the initial conception of Alto, that was the first wave of NFTs, I would say, with CryptoKitties. And then there was a bit of a lull, and then there was this game called Axie Infinity that came out, which was the massive Web3 game, and it was the start of Play to Earn. And that was when we were able to fundraise because we were early in the space. We knew of a lot of folks also who were in the Play to Earn space, being based out of Manila. And because one of my co-founders was Gabby Dizon, who also co-founded YGG, which is the Yield Guild Games. And yeah, so that allowed us to really accelerate how we built OP games. So we built Arcadia, the platform. We started launching NFT collections also. We were able to fundraise for some game development companies and also communities, and also contribute to open source like Blender, Phaser, and some of these companies. So yeah, so I think that's been the history. As I said, we pivoted a bit towards AI, and that's because I think, going back to the open question on how we're able to build better games in Web3, I don't think that's been fully answered. And so I think we're doing this AI side quest, I feel, to figure out, is there something with this tech that will allow us to build these games better?
What is it that you see in AI that you think will allow you to build games better?
Oh, that's a good question also. I think one thing I do recognize is, or maybe going a bit back towards the Web3 games, right? When Axie Infinity came out and Play to Earn became a trend, I wasn't really that enamored with the model, because it's about going back to the transactional nature of these games, right? It's easy to imagine how they will fail, and we've seen a lot of them fail, right? None of them were really able to sustain that growth and a community around these games. And with AI, I just feel that it really breaks that model much faster. For example, a lot of these play-to-earn games are around guilds. And guilds, how they work mostly is you get a lot of people together, and they are able to influence the economy a lot, right? Because there's a lot of them. And with AI, you just have to make people make their own agents, and that's going to accelerate all of that. So I feel that breaks play-to-earn. And my sense is, if you want to be able to fight against the tech or build better systems, then you need to know how to use it. And that's essentially why we're looking at AI. And also, I feel this is a tough thing to think about, right? But AI as well is changing how we're interacting with systems. There's a lot of stories with AI influencing people and how they think. There are a lot of articles around a term they called AI psychosis, I think, where you're chatting with an AI and it just reinforces all the wrong things that you're thinking of. And so I feel this is going to be a dominant form of just how people interact with systems. And so if you need to grapple with that, then you need to understand it. And yeah, that's mostly it. It's still also an exploration on how it can make better games. And right now it's challenging, but I do see some people trying to, for example, build decentralized asset generation. For example, it will allow you to build games with less cost. So things like that, I think, are the things that I'm a bit more focused on, and just being more playful with it, honestly. Because a lot of the systems, they're just chatbots, like they're wrappers on top of ChatGPT. But I want to explore how can we use this to really, again, build more prosocial games, right? Instead of just focusing on a chatbot, that maybe there's a way for it to enhance, just games that build better connections. And that's the hope.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're having this whole conversation about games, and the elusive quality within these new technologies is a sense of playfulness and being prosocial. You talk about the echo chamber you find yourself in with an AI oftentimes, which is a problem across social media and platforms on which we seek information.
Yeah.
And my wife works for Lego.
Oh, cool.
She,
what does she do in Lego?
she's the director of Global Play Day.
Oh, Wow, that's so
Y-
fun.
yeah. I
Yeah.
wanted to mention it because so this is a relatively new thing. This past June
Mm.
was the first Global Play Day. Basically, Lego spearheaded a petition to the UN for the need to recognize the importance of play. And they cited that across the world, I think play had decreased by about 25% amongst
Oh,
kids.
wow.
And
Oh, that's bad.
and you
Yeah.
can tie that metric to overall well-being as well, which again highlights the importance of this playful quality, which I think is rooted in pro-social behavior and in pro-social games. When you're playing with other people, there
Mm-hmm.
is an inherent sense of well-being that you can find in that interaction. And what is the ideal? Where do you think we can get to? We have the opportunity to build the systems that you're interested in influencing
Mm-hmm.
with these outcomes of more pro-social games that have more of a playful quality. What is a future that integrates some of these technologies, AI, Web3s, decentralized assets, things like that? What does that look like?
Oh, wow. That's a really, really ambitious
Yeah,
question.
I put you on the spot.
No, I love it though. I just want to go back a little to what you said on like how there's 25% less play nowadays. I think I read somewhere that's also why a lot of young people are lonely and more fragile nowadays because they weren't able to have that play that, for example, I had growing up, wherein you go out and play with other people. There's a little bit of danger, right? But that also gives you a bit more
Hmm.
resilience. And so I think, yeah, let's imagine that world. Honestly, nowadays, if you imagine the future, a lot of it is very dystopian, seeing where things are
Yeah.
going, right? But one thing that at least I like about what AI is starting to help us do is also understand how we're thinking. Like, for example, when I'm studying LLMs, I find it also gives you a little bit of insight on how your own brain thinks. And I think it was Jeffrey
Mm.
Hinton.
Mm.
I attended a talk that he gave recently on biological intelligence versus digital
Mm.
intelligence. And he was saying that his suspicion is biological intelligence works largely the same way as digital
Yeah.
intelligence. And just with that small kernel of truth, right, then you can try and understand how human brains work as well, just using these LLMs. So I guess projecting what a good future would be is by studying these AI models, and also we understand ourselves and we build better interactions that will allow us to have better human flourishing, I would say, understand what makes us happier and use these models and create new synthetic beings, I would say, that would allow us to amplify
Mm.
that, right? Because my sense is like I'm of the mind that AI is actually right an actual new kind of intelligence that we've created, and there's no way of turning
Mm.
that back. And so we need to use this technology to imagine a better future. What would it look like when these robots are embodied? What kind of interaction should we have with
Mhm.
them? And how could it better play with other humans? Yeah, and of course I look at sci-fi for a
Sure.
lot of things to imagine that.
Yeah.
Sadly, a lot of sci-fi is dystopian, but I think you can, I don't know, maybe just imagine the negative of these sci-fi
Mm.
films and see how it could be better, just trying to push back that
Yeah.
dystopia. But robots will be a thing in that future, I would surmise. Yeah, and we just have to contend with all the AI stuff that's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe Lego robots. Okay, your wife can make these
Yeah.
Lego robots that allow people to play safely.
That's an
Yeah.
idea. Yeah. Yeah. I'll chat with her about it tonight, see if she wants to pitch it to the powers that be.
Yeah. Hmm. Although Lego makes a lot of good games, I find, even just video
Mm.
games, it's more playful than most games.
Yeah, just because it's rooted in just
Yeah.
like this very simple building block. It's the same sort of principle that
Hmm.
is oftentimes emulated across Web3 speak.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was also one of our, I guess, taglines. We were trying to build game Legos, which is like how do you recreate games on Web3 with these building
Hmm.
blocks? And yeah, so like SDKs and
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Legos are the enduring building block in which they're infinitely composable, and it
Mm.
requires your imagination to come in and create the world that you want to see.
Yeah.
Uh, and Yeah, I think it's really powerful, and it's one of the things that always come back to Kernel for. Is if we want to imagine other worlds that aren't dystopian, we have to cultivate spaces for those thinkers and those builders to be in community with other people who feel the same way.
Yeah.
That's been the magic of Kernel that I've always seen, and it's in this space, in this world that we live in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I remember the first few kernel blocks. Right? It was very meaningful for a lot of people. During firesides, people would really just be energized, and some people would cry during the firesides, the early ones, right? And so people yearn for that meaning, right? And as I said, like kernel grounds us, and so it helps you think about things more deeply with all the noise around technology.
Yeah. Well, let's see where we go.
I know, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I hope it keeps going, right? Because there's not a lot of spaces that are like this. Yeah, but there are some trying, but it's not kernel.
yeah.
Yeah, there's something really unique about
Yeah.
kernel.
Yeah, I think it's the groundedness. It's the fact that it arose from this philosophy that.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah, we just need to find more places to instill that.
Yeah, I wish also we could get the fellows together more frequently. I feel because a lot of kernel also I think is influenced by who the fellows are. So some of the really great blocks where all the fellows were engaged, wherein people were helping me build the gaming guild, and we would keep going until the 8 weeks. So things like that, right?
Yeah, I think having that reciprocal energy is really important. Cool. That seems like a good place to hit pause for now. But this has been
Awesome.
really lovely, Paul. Thank you so much.